I took this, my first stab at this scheme, and an okay paint job, and with a few tweaks and a few changes, I turned it into this, a competition winning replication of that scheme. In this video, I'm going to show exactly how I did that. Now, if we look at the side-by-side of these two, it's obvious to see the differences. The scheme is the same, but evidently one has a lot more effort put into it than the other. I've put significantly more effort into more difficult techniques such as non-metallic metal as opposed to traditional true metallics. But I think other than just straight time, as this clip shows pretty clearly, the difference in contrast between where the scheme was at before, just straight airbrushing the colors, as opposed to pushing them further with more time and refinement. Somewhere in here lies the secret to really elevating this paint scheme. Now, for the most part, when I compare these two color-wise, nothing much really changes. It's more the techniques in applying them and the amount of time taken and the amount of care in refining the scheme with that time. I started out painting the second, better commander the exact same way I did the first commander, as well as all my other battle suits in this scheme. And that is just airbrushing the colors, blocking them in. I don't want to go into that too much because I do actually have an entire video on that scheme originally. But after doing the original steps, which is airbrush the base coat, then airbrush a highlight tone, and then with an airbrush take the shadow tone and re-establish some shadow, as well as using an oil wash in this specific case because towel models just lend themselves to oil washes perfectly. It's now time to really elevate this scheme, and that is with essentially one element that I want to keep in mind with this, and that is contrast, pushing that contrast, deepening the shadows, raising the highlights while still keeping them in that exact same spectrum of color, just making them deeper and richer. So with a brush, essentially all I'm doing is taking the same shadow tone and wet blending it, feathering it into the shadow just to really darken it at the furthest edge. I do apologize for the interruption, but I have a sponsor for this video. Only Games hosts a plethora of incredible sculpts from many different creators that you can purchase as both physical models that can be sent to you and STLs that you can buy and print yourself. I have a ton of the Dredge from Mezgeik, which are honestly some of my favorite models. And it's really been bothering me that I haven't actually added to this army. It's constantly on my mind and I just have so many projects on the go at any given time, but these are definitely some of my favorite miniatures that I own. Only Games have been gracious enough to give me a discount code to share with you guys, which is PaintByAz15. that if you use on their store, you will obviously get 15% off any of your purchases there, and I will get a small kickback, which helps support me in making these videos and the channel. So if you're interested in any of these or any of the massive range of stuff that they stock, go check them out and use PaintByAz15 when you purchase something. I'll then do the exact same with the highlight tone, but I'll then push it a little bit further by mixing the first edge highlight tone into that brighter layer and pushing it even further. To aid in doing this, all I'm doing is mixing the paint with some water, but if you're having a hard time keeping it dry, if you're not using a wet palette, you can use some paint retarder or even some airbrush flow improver. That helps reduce the drying time as well as make it easier to feather it out if you are struggling. I took a fairly laborious route with this model and separated out every single armor panel. So as you can see here with the jump pack, I could have very easily taken the entire side profile of it and just gone brightest to darkest, but I decided to break out all of these individual panels, even if maybe with light it doesn't actually necessarily make sense. It does make it quite striking. And with a model of this scale, it helps in separating those shapes and making them much more easily readable, which I think is a really important thing with small miniatures, and why I think pushing the contrast in them is incredibly important, because they are so small, we want to be able to really, at a glance, separate different shapes and sections of the model and make them quite easily readable. This technique was something that I pretty much carried across the entire model. The individual red panels on the model, I did the exact same way. I started with a dark base tone, and then I just gradually feathered up the highlights. I didn't actually include any deeper shadows into these. And then I did the exact same with the white panels. I started with a mid-gray, colder because I wanted it to contrast with the warm armor, and just gradually feathered it up to white. I did, with the white, decide to include a little bit of scratchy texture into it as well. So I wasn't necessarily as concerned with being completely smooth with these sections, but the concept is much the same. Now with the black armor sections, where I had previously just taken a white ink and airbrushed some highlights and then hit the entire surface with a quick dry brush to pick out the edges of the black metal, for this scheme I did start it the same way, but instead of using a white highlight, I just used a mid-gray, and then kind of just like the white to separate the texture a little bit from the armor and make it look like a slightly different material. I started with first a layer of that same mid-gray through a brush and gradually brought in more and more white and just added some kind of stippled highlights to go from darker to brighter, reducing the surface area with every subsequent layer to create a reflective looking black metal surface. Beyond that, like I mentioned, I did paint the kind of weird circular mechanical pieces, I don't know what they actually are meant to be, in non-metallic gold as opposed to metallic gold like my previous commander. I basically followed the exact same recipe as in my previous video where I painted Blood Angel's captain, and at the end I wasn't happy with him, so I decided to paint his helmet non-metallic gold. After that, I just picked out some of the details. I decided to freehand with some straight white, just some sept markings, and then I painted all of his lenses and lights just with some Vallejo royal purple, and then gradually mixing in some white to make that a pink essentially. Another change I made from this guy was, instead of chipping his armor and making him damaged, I decided to keep him quite clean because I was very happy with how this armor turned out, and I didn't really want to sully it. I kind of wanted to show off those creamy blends. And with a relatively small selection of paints in a very limited palette, I ended up with one of the models that I've been the most proud of for a while, and I think that is largely due to just putting in more effort and really spending time in refining the paint jobs and not just calling it good. Really deciding to push myself that little bit further. Like I said before, this did actually win a competition. The first painting competition that I've ever actually entered, it got first in the large model category. I think it just snuck into large, being on a 60mm base.
All right, and that leaves us with our first place entry for large. This model blew me away, as we have this Tau Commander painted by Arun. Look at how smooth these blends are on that white shoulder pad, on the helmet. This model, really, you need to see it in person. It's crazy. Yeah, very, very breathtaking. I've been pointing this out to as many people will listen to me. Look at how good this is. Oh, amazing, amazing. Congratulations.
But that has actually just really sparked something in me that I think I haven't been super happy with painting for a while. I've been kind of calling it good enough, you know, doing the bare minimum, but kind of making it look decent and not putting my all in, not pushing myself, not really learning and struggling with anything, which I think is valuable, because I think while I didn't necessarily have much failure with this model, I was kind of stressed the entire time painting it, and the entire time I wasn't sure how it would go. I think that is really where we see growth, is where we push ourselves. Even when we fail, that's where we learn. And I think that's super important, and that has actually, like I said, sparked something in me where I'm actually enjoying painting a lot again. It's even gone to the point where I've picked up some stuff to actually really put in some time and effort and work on a competition piece for a convention that's coming up in a few months. So I'm actually quite excited about that. But yeah, I know this wasn't a long video. I know it's not like a full color scheme, but again, all the colors are in the previous Tau Commander video. It's just more effort's been put into this one. And I kind of wanted to share the process of this. So I hope, even though it's not a ton of information that I've imparted in this video, hopefully you're able to actually get something out of it. I'm kind of making this in between a couple of other videos. I've got a really big project coming up that's going to be taking place this weekend, essentially. So with that, I'm going to end it, and I will see you guys in the next one.